When I think of my nostalgia for Trails of Cold Steel 1, I remember a character-driven RPG that I couldn't quite wrap my finger around why it was so enjoyable. It was something completely different than any other game I had played at the time and opened a new door to story-heavy games. I'm not sure if it was the character development, storytelling, or just a combination of it all clicking with me, but I found the game to be one of the coolest games I've ever played. And after rewatching my playthrough, I've decided to place it ahead of The Legend of Dragoon. Here's why. The experience I had playing Trails of Cold Steel 1 was very different from other games. While it wasn't the first time I had done a second playthrough or more, it was the first time I had done a walkthrough approach, the first New Game Plus, and the first game at the hardest difficulty. I decided that I wanted to achieve what I couldn't in my first playthrough, which was 100% all quests. I followed a guide to achieve that and used my prior playthrough knowledge and levels to move through the game with very little resistance. It was very easy for me to not only think back to the nostalgia I had from my first playthrough, but also see the fun I was having playing the game. The twists and turns were fun to revisit and the mechanics of the game still held up in the moment. I certainly acknowledged the game's shortcomings, but I also recognized it as a very unique game for me. It's so rare for me to play such story-heavy games that aren't visual novels, and Trails of Cold Steel 1 seemed to take all the good parts from RPGs and visual novels. The rewatch for the game may be another unique experience that I'll likely never encounter for any other series. I've certainly already watched this playthrough once before, but I've also finished playing the entire Cold Steel series. While I won't get into any of the other games here, the influence of those games certainly plays a factor and it would be tough to ignore it. That said, Trails of Cold Steel 1 created a great introduction point. The start of the game is insufferably slow, especially after the tease at the beginning where you're at Guerrilla Fortress. Regrettably, the game never really gets away from that slowness and it puts heavy focus on the characters and world building. At this point in my life, I certainly prefer a game to have a steady ramp up, but Trails of Cold Steel 1 employs multiple ramps up to climactic moments that are followed by devastating drops in action and intrigue. For example, if you exclude the opening sequence of the game, the story really doesn't do anything until approximately 21 hours into my New Game Plus playthrough, where the Watchtower is attacked in the Nord Highlands. The game finally opens up its plot and you're introduced to a member of the Imperial Liberation Front, except after the events with Gideon in the Ancient Quarry, I needed to wait until 39 hours in my playthrough to reach the Guerrilla Fortress incident. Meanwhile, that 18-hour period in between consisted of the game going back to the status quo, field studies, school activities, and general shenanigans. This method of storytelling is repeated until the final 2 hours of my playthrough, where the big reveals are pulled out and action seriously picks up. The ending of the game is likely the most exciting portion, but as soon as those 2 hours are up, the game just abruptly ends. I think it's very important for me to note that I find the journey of a game more important than the ending of one. This detail makes things difficult for me because how can I justify my enjoyment of an entire game if it's the final 2 hours that create that enjoyment? Was the 50 plus hours of the game really worth those final 2 hours that I got? Not a chance. Yet at the same time, it's hard to ignore how I came to love the game and those 50 plus hours played a significant role. I also think it's important to speak on the presentation of the game in terms of the aesthetics. It's very true that when looking at Trails of Cold Steel 1, a game that released in 2013 for Japan, it's not a big technological advancement. I do think that the visuals of the game are a cause for concern for the greater audiences at large, but for myself, I don't mind it. It certainly does look aged and the animation can be very bare bones, but the game earns the charm that it has despite the visual shortcomings. Having said all that I have or can, I do think it's important to state that this is the first game in the series, and despite my grievances with how the plot is handled, the game excels in its mission to set the stage for a new set of characters exploring a new world. That's also to speak very little of its combat system, which, aside from the Divine Knight battles, are among my favorite combat systems and mechanics. The game puts its focus on you getting familiar with certain aspects so that they can be glossed over in the future, and that's totally fine. Based on memory, I ranked Trails of Cold Steel 1 at 32 out of 117, and I honestly have no idea where I think it should fit in the grand scheme of things. I like the characters, I like the world, and I like the plot they have given me a taste of, even if it's just a tiny morsel. I also like the combat and the general feel of the game, just not necessarily the techniques used to tell the story. I also greatly enjoy the music, which includes some serious certified bangers and emotional pieces. So after all of that, I think Trails of Cold Steel 1 limps ahead of The Legend of Dragoon. I have my issues with it, but I honestly believe that as a first entry for a grand and epic series spanning 4 games, its approach, however unorthodox for me now, worked enough to keep me playing and keep me invested. Somehow, I was enticed enough to play the second game even with everything I mentioned holding it back, so that has to mean something.